As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So President Biden asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to pause Israel's assault on Gaza for 3 days to allow progress in Hamas releasing hostages. And this was reported by Axios on Tuesday. And this request was made in a phone call that took place on Monday. But Israel continues to rebuff U.S. calls for a humanitarian pause in Gaza. On Tuesday, Israeli President Isaac Herzog spoke with Vice President Kamala Harris, and he said that there would be no kind of ceasefire without Hamas releasing all of its hostages first. So according to this Axios report, the U.S., Israel, and Qatar have been discussing a proposal that would involve Hamas releasing 10 to 15 hostages and then using the 3-day pause in fighting to verify the names of the remaining captives and then deliver a list and say, this is who we have. Israel has said that a total of 240 people were captured during the October 7th attack, although Hamas is saying that 60 are missing due to Israeli airstrikes. So far, Hamas has released 4 hostages and says that it's ready to release 12 more foreign nationals, but can't because of the Israeli bombardment. So in the call on Monday, Netanyahu told Biden that he did not trust Hamas's intentions and that he didn't believe they would agree to a deal regarding hostages. He's basically saying, we're not going to negotiate with them. And he's also worried that if Israel pauses its brutal assault for 3 days, it will lose international support. It doesn't have much international support as it is, but I think Netanyahu is probably concerned that thinking this is his chance, the U.S. is still backing me, I just got to keep going, full steam ahead here. And again, while we have Biden suggesting things like this, the U.S. isn't using any of its leverage to get Israel to stop. That could change. Hopefully that changes, soon enough. But I think that's a big part of Netanyahu's calculations is right now they're not forcing me to stop, so we're just going to keep going. So in an interview with ABC News on Monday, Netanyahu said that he is open to little pauses, but not a ceasefire without the release of hostages first. And the Biden administration has refused to use the term ceasefire a 3-day pause in fighting. That sounds like a pause in fighting, pause in airstrikes. That sounds like a ceasefire to me, but they still aren't using that term. I think they're just afraid to use it because it might indicate that they don't want to keep backing the war. I think by not using it, they're making it clear that, they're not talking about ending the assault. They're just talking about putting it on pause for a bit and then restarting it after you get some more hostages out. So, but again, it doesn't seem like Netanyahu is going for that. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu envisions Israel taking overall security responsibility for the Gaza Strip indefinitely if the Israeli war to destroy Hamas is successful, and he said this in an interview that aired late Monday. So Netanyahu said, quote, I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have overall security responsibility because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we could not imagine, end quote. So what he's saying here is, for Israel to be in charge of security in Gaza indefinitely, that would mean, military occupation. Gaza was under Israeli military occupation for decades. They pulled their troops out in 2005 and then imposed the military blockade in 2007. So it's been under a brutal blockade since then. And it sounds like Netanyahu, if his war against Hamas is successful, he's not going to want to pull his troops out. And I do think the ultimate, what they really want, what Netanyahu and his party wants, is to annex the territory and kick all the Palestinians out. It's pretty clear. The question is if he's going to be able to do that. So when asked if John Kirby was asked if the U.S. would support Netanyahu's vision, and he said that they are still discussing the future of Gaza, of a post-war Gaza. One thing he said is that the U.S. does not, the U.S. position is that Hamas cannot be in control of Gaza anymore. He said, quote, what we support is that Hamas can't be in control of Gaza anymore. We can't go back to October 6th. We are having conversations with our Israeli counterparts about what governance in Gaza should look like post-conflict, and I don't believe that any solutions have been settled upon one way or the other, end quote. So U.S. officials have said, and Kirby has said, that they don't want Israel to occupy Gaza after this war, but realistically, they're not putting any conditions on their support for Israel, so I just can't, if Israel does end up occupying Gaza, I just can't imagine the U.S. stopping them from doing it. So a top aide to Zelensky has said the West needs to keep backing Ukraine's war with Russia, and he hit back at comments made by Italy's prime minister about growing war fatigue. So this is Meloni, the Italian prime minister. She made these comments last week while on the phone with Russian pranksters who she thought were African Union officials. She said, quote, "There is a lot of fatigue. I have to say the truth from all sides. We are near the moment in which everybody understands that we need a way out," end quote. Again, she's talking about the war in Ukraine. So Andriy Yermak, who is the head of Zelensky's office, claimed that the West would be less safe if it stopped fueling the proxy war. He said, quote, "Even if there are people who feel this fatigue, I'm sure they don't want to wake up in a world tomorrow where there will be less freedom and less security, and the consequences of this last for decades," end quote. So kind of using the narrative that if Russia isn't stopped in Ukraine, they're going to march into Poland, into Eastern Europe, which is just a whole lot of nonsense. And Yermak's pushback comes amid mounting signs that Ukraine will struggle to maintain the support it needs from the U.S. and NATO to keep the war going.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
So, now you got the Ukraine war. Before this, it's out of the news. And I have warned over and over again, it's going to get back in the news. It's going to get back in the news. Oh, they just bombed Donbass today. The Ukrainians killed a bunch of people in Donbass, but that doesn't make the news. They're going to do an assault on a nuclear power plant, a major event against Russia somehow, some way, a false flag reel. They're going to get back in the news. Zelensky wants the money to keep the war going. It's totally out of the news. World War III has begun. We said it with the Ukraine war, COVID war, to Ukraine war, to World War. And in 3 years, this world has changed. The COVID war changed the world like we knew it. Then the Ukraine war, and now the Israeli war. The Israel war, Ukraine war, World War III has begun. Oh, and that guy Netanyahu, we only warn Trends Journal subscribers now since he got into power late last year, 1 week after another, running the articles about what the mainstream media called his extreme right-wing government, slaughtering Palestinians, bombing the mosques, stealing more land under the fucking bullshit name of settlers. They were ramping this up. When all else fails, they take you to war. People, I ask, they don't know dick about shit about the 39 weeks of protests going on in Israel that the Israelis called a civil war. That's the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, and a number of Israeli officials. A civil war was going on there. Totally fucking forgotten. And most 99.999% of the people don't even know what's going on. When all else fails, they take you to war. And as you read in your Trends Journal, Biden pushes for 3-day pause from Israel. The U.S. president has reportedly suggested that a halt to fighting could help secure releases of some hostages by Hamas. A 3-day pause? How about stopping the fucking slaughter? 3-day pause. Oh, and an article that we have in here before about Biden. Yep, Biden tells Jewish rabbis no time for ceasefire. That's right. And this is the fucking bullshit. Again, what Hamas did, totally opposed to it. Disgusting. But this is what they keep reporting week after week after week after week after week. Was it the 5th week is going on? This is from the Jerusalem Post. Every fucking article. Israel at war. IDF deep in Gaza. Fighting resumes in north. And then they have 1,400 Israelis murdered since October 7th, including 345 soldiers, 241 held hostages by Hamas, 4 hostages released, 1 rescued. Every fucking day, they go back to what happened on October 7th. But nobody talks about what we printed in the Trends Journal week after week after week after week, month after month after month after month. Netanyahu and his government slaughtering Palestinians, stealing their land, bombing mosques, one after another. But this is all that counts. 1,400 dead. That's nothing compared to what you've been doing to the Palestinians. The markets. You ready? All right. Diesel demand is shrinking. Yep. Along with the manufacturing indexes in the United States and Europe. That's what you have to look at. You don't look at this fucking bullshit, GDP going up because you're spending more money in services and hospitalities. That's a lot of crap. Prices should be going way up right now. They're going down on gas and oil. West Texas just hit a low, like it's the lowest since July today. They're falling big because the global economy is slowing down big. The export numbers just came out from China, down 6.4%. from the same time last year. 6.4%. And the 6th month in a row of declining exports. This is the Chinese that gave us the COVID war to celebrate Chinese Lunar New Year, the year of the rat, January 2020. And there are 3 years of zero COVID policy. The destruction it's done, again, the COVID war, the Ukraine war, and the Israel war. This is, you're worried about the economy. We may not be life on earth. We may be annihilated. Here, and talking about the damage it's done. This is from the New York Post yesterday. Full page, right? Lean streets. New York City's post-COVID recovery among worst. Foot traffic down 33%. 33% down. One after another, you look at the crap going on, what's going on in, there's a big story in Fox News today about all the businesses, the restaurants closing up in San Francisco and what a fucking slum hole it is. I left my heart in San Francisco, not anymore. I'm leaving San Francisco. Brought to you by scumbag, rotten fucking politicians. We're fighting the COVID war. Close down your business. Stay home. We'll tell you what to do. When you look at what's going on in the equity markets, it's a total fucking fraud. China's going down. Europe is in recession, the brink of. It's all that. Look at the manufacturing index numbers. This thing's going down. We said the markets would go down in September and October. They did. We said they would go up back last November. The S&P would go up over 16%, and it did. And now we're saying a crash is coming. But don't worry, when all else fails, they take you to war. Unless we, the people, fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
Dismantling of the FDA, then what's it going to take? Right, okay, how did this opioid crisis happen? Let's look at the facts. Let's speak to some key players here. Does anyone, for example, work at the FDA? Well, we'll speak to everyone that worked at the FDA. All right, what about people that worked at Purdue Pharma? We'll speak to all of them. They're the same people. Do you think that might be leading to this crisis? If the legacy media don't carry out an investigation over years, speaking to hundreds of people, when the hundreds of thousands of deaths are taking place, do you think they might have a dog in the fight? Do you think they might have some skin in the game? Do you think that they might be part of the problem? Do you not see that the thing that's truly important about this pandemic is that it revealed absolute corruption of the state, big pharma, and the legacy media working together in total conjunction and lockstep to ensure that their agenda could be amplified and met without question, and that any independent media voices that dared to oppose it were shut down, whether that's Tucker Carlson, booted off of Fox, or whether it's Joe Rogan having his own stuff to deal with, or any other voices that you may have seen significantly attacked as a result of ongoing legacy media campaigns. How extraordinary. If they're so keen on investigations, where's that investigation? If the FDA can get away with this, then who's going to step in and regulate when it comes to the crisis that has apparently been brought about as a result of the pandemic? Who are you going to trust to ask the questions? The FDA is far from the only agency whose employees have moved on to higher paying private sector jobs for dubious reasons. Yeah. A recent study conducted by researchers at the University of Southern California and Harvard University reported that between 2004 and 2020, 54% of workers at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, remember from the legacy media, new things going to be improved, but oh my God, it's not just the FDA that has to improve it. That would be open to some kind of corruption. Then the CDC, they have to approve it. Who left the agency for another job, moved into the private health sector where workers can get higher salaries. 54% of their employees went into the private sector where they can get higher salaried jobs. This isn't even a condemnation of individuals. Who among us doesn't want to earn more money for our families or to survive in this crazy topsy-turvy world? But this is an issue that affects hundreds of thousands, well in the case of this, billions of lives, and it was totally corruptible and totally corrupted. Craig Holman, the government affairs lobbyist for the consumer watchdog group Public Citizens, said, "The revolving door is particularly abusive in agencies that have a huge flood of money going in. And so we need safeguards to make sure they are serving the public interest. You need a period of time where the close relationships and the networks kind of break down." Yeah, you do. Actually, what you need is proper regulation, and you need normal people, I would say, involved in these institutions. Not like, see this public watchdog that's actually exposed it, shows you how things should be run. Think about during the pandemic period, all those people that came forward at great risk to their personal career. Peter McCulloch, Robert Malone, Jay Bhattacharya, Dave Martin, Judy Miscavige, all those people that were willing to come forward and go, hang on a minute, this don't sound right. You, sir, and you, madam, are conspiracy theorists. That's what's going on here. I am the science, said Fauci. They were all right. They were correct. And the legacy media never investigated it because that's not what the legacy media does. As soon as the legacy media tells you they're in an investigation, you know something's going wrong. The pharmaceutical industry finances about 75% of the FDA's drug division. So the relevant bit, they almost entirely fund. Ban that overnight. We're going to have an FDA that's funded entirely separately from the pharmaceutical industry. Well, what makes you think that's such a good idea? I don't know. We're just noticing there's this massive opioid crisis. In a sense, it shows you, with barely any scrutiny at all, that the entire system is so corrupted that it could basically never work again because we've all somehow imbibed the wrong set of values. Now, have a radical reassessment of how the whole thing actually went down. During this COVID inquiry that's going on in our country right now, do you think they're going to say, hey, we made all these deals with Moderna, maybe we should shut down those factories now, maybe we should look at the relation? No, it'll be a very limited analysis. The bare minimum is what they'll do. And it was this person's fault and this person's fault, but the system itself is basically okay. They won't come up with a conclusion that many of you have already reached. The whole system is broken. You cannot trust the government. You cannot trust the media. It is time to oppose this power. Van Tam is prohibited from using privileged information from his time in government to further his business interests. Van Tam here. Van Tam, you're not using information gleaned from your time working in the government to advance your interests at Moderna. I'll be honest with you. That's all I'm doing. Rose Whiffen, the senior research officer at Transparency International UK, said, when companies employ former officials, regardless of whether they worked in that industry before their government role or not, it raises the risk of privileged information being misused for commercial benefit. Also, it creates a culture, which is basically the culture that you live in. Currently, there are only minimal safeguards against abuse of the revolving door between the public and private sector. The government should prohibit ex-senior civil servants and ministers from taking up positions where they've had substantial responsibility for policy relevant to hiring the company. Did you see this? Minimal safeguards against abuse of the revolving door. No records at the FDA of former employees. Well, you try going on X and putting up like a natural immunity and vitamin D are quite good. We're worried the vaccines might affect breast. Safeguards, regulations, records. There's records for you. You try being a dissenting voice. Suddenly, oh, hold on a minute, the mainstream media are interested. Let's do an investigation. Quick, put your best man on. Find everyone they've ever spoken to. That's interesting use of resources. Regulations for you, scrutiny for you, skepticism for you, transparency, no privacy for you, maximum privacy for them, no safeguards from them. Wow, guess who pays for it? They pay for it, so I get... No, we pay for it. We're funding it, they're exploiting it. When do you want to end it?
Sir Francis Bacon, who was a mid-16th to early 17th century guy. He was an English philosopher and statesman who served as Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England under King James I. Bacon led the advancement of both natural philosophy and the scientific method. I think he's often called the father of empiricism, but he also played a leading role in establishing the British colonies in North America. And I think this may be the tie-in for Jefferson, especially in Virginia, the Carolinas, and Newfoundland. His government report on the Virginia colony was submitted in 1609, and there are some scholars, I can't verify one way or the other, but there are some scholars who believe he was largely responsible for the drafting in 1609 and 1612 of two charters of government for the Virginia colony. William Hepworth Dixon, this is over in Wikipedia, considered that Bacon's name could be included in the list of the founders of the United States, maybe a grandfather or a great-grandfather. Now, Benjamin Franklin was a big fan as well, and here he is in his Poor Richard's Almanac. Poor Richard, improved in 1749. Put it this way, on the 7th of this month, 1626, died that great little man, Sir Francis Bacon, great in his prodigious genius, parts, and learning, and little in his servile compliances with a little court and submissive flattery of a little prince. I mean, not total fan. Pope characterizes him thus in one strong line. If parts allure thee, think how Bacon shined, the wisest, brightest, meanest of mankind. And one way that we can see some of Bacon's influence throughout Jefferson's writing, especially in later years, was the phrase, knowledge is power. And that's often attributed, as Monticello puts it here, to Francis Bacon from his Meditations Sacrae, 1597. And they point out that Jefferson used this phrase in his correspondence on at least 4 occasions, each time in connection with the establishment of a university in Virginia, which is what he thought was one of his most important projects. So here's a couple of examples. I've got 2 of them. One in a letter to George Tinkner in 1817. He says, knowledge is power, knowledge is safety, and knowledge is happiness. Benjamin Rush, some years later, earlier than this letter here, also said, without knowledge, without learning, people are incapable of knowing your rights. And if you can't know your rights, you don't know how to defend them. Without knowledge, you have no power. Jefferson basically equated knowledge with power, safety, and happiness. And here he is again to a letter to Joseph C. Cabell, Christmas Day. This is what Jefferson is writing about, December 25th, 1820. He said, "There are but 3 states smaller than Massachusetts, that she is the 21st only in the scale of size, and but 1/10 of that of Virginia. Yet it is unquestionable that she has more influence in our Confederacy than any other state in it." I like that he still refers to it as a confederacy. "Whence this ascendancy? From her attention to education unquestionably." And he said there can be no stronger proof that knowledge is power and that ignorance is weakness. And we see this all over today. There's so much ignorance on the founding principles, on the Constitution, on what liberty is all about, and how to defend all of them. That's basically the work that we do. We try to teach these original foundational principles, and of course, how to defend the Constitution and liberty when government refuses to do so, which is constant 24/7, 365. And a vast majority of the people are nowhere close to having knowledge. And therefore, the people are weak and the government is extremely, extremely strong. Sir Isaac Newton, not someone you would think of as having an influence on the founding generation, on the structure of the Constitution even. But there really is an interesting point to be made here from an article by Rob Natelson, The Ideas That Form the Constitution, Sir Isaac Newton, a really great series that he did on this, on some of the people who influenced the founders. And Joe Wolverton does awesome work on this as well. And Rob writes this: Sir Isaac Newton wasn't a political thinker like Marcus Cicero or John Locke, who we'll get to in a moment. He was a scientist. Indeed, he exemplified the scientific revolution, an event that changed not only how people thought about the physical universe, but also how they thought about politics in government. In that way, Newton and his scientific colleagues greatly affected the U.S. Constitution. I would rather call it the Constitution for the United States. Again, Rob says, the scientific revolution, and particularly Newton's work, taught men that the universe wasn't willful or chaotic, but governed by rules of order. Once you knew the rules, the physical universe becomes predictable. So, for example, if you know that if you vest the power of both declaring and waging war in one individual, that person will become very prone to waging the war or declaring the war in order to wage it. And that's what many of the founders said as well. If you give too much power to too few people, you shouldn't be surprised that power expands, because it is a maxim of human nature that when you give power to anyone, whether it's vested in many or in a few, as Abigail Adams put it, it is ever grasping. So these are the types of things that we learn. And if you think about that first law of motion from Sir Isaac Newton, I know we probably all heard about something like this in science class many years ago, and I don't have this exact, but it's basically an object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless it's acted on by some external force. And so if you think about it in that context, a government that is always expanding, unless there is a counterbalancing force, it will relentlessly expand. And that's what really we've seen play out, because there has been almost no counterbalancing force in modern times. And so this government that starts to grow bit by bit for one emergency or another, for one extreme situation, you get a Federal Reserve and an income tax or the Patriot Act, these things that are supposed to be limited to very small things. And then they expand over time and they get worse and worse and worse. And unless states and people act as a counterbalance to the government, Lysander Spooner said, resistance is really the only way to keep a government in check. And that's the same thing that one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court said, James Iredell. The inherent right of the people to prevent usurpation's exercise is the only way to stop that. That's how James Iredell put it. So if you think of it in that context, the idea of the 10th Amendment, the idea of nullification is very Newtonian. It's about acting, an external object acting against that federal government. Anyway.
White House says Israel has killed, quote, many, many thousands of innocents, end quote. That's an incredible admission that I think it was spokesman John Kirby made. And then here's what he says. The comments were made by White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, who previously told reporters to expect that Israel would continue to kill innocent civilians. So they've killed many thousands of innocent civilians, and they're going to kill thousands more. So just get used to it is basically, just put that up for one more second, is basically what Kirby is saying. And now this is Gaza's health ministry, so it's a government source. All government sources should be suspect on all sides. But Gaza's health ministry said on Tuesday that at least 10,328 Palestinians have been killed, including 4,237 children. Thousands more are missing and presumed to be under the rubble. buried under rubble for days and weeks.
See, this seems to be way out of proportion to war going on, innocents die and children get in the crossfire. But this number is so high, it's almost like, well, we have to stop the multiplying of people who are going to come and hurt us. And it's sort of a strategy that sort of is sickening. But the Biden administration has cast doubt on the numbers that are put out there. And like you said, there's reason to doubt. Why should we have to believe them? And Pentagon spokesman General Ryder has also acknowledged that thousands of civilians have been killed. Yeah. You know, because matter of fact, the way the language is on both sides. You know, there's factions on both sides that they're pretty tough and strong. That you know, this is not just target practice. Yeah. I mean, we have to wipe them out, and as if that's going to solve the problem. But that's a terrible philosophy to have. But here we're standing there, we're trying to figure out what's going on, and we might be a very, very influence in the whole mess, help to create it. Yeah. Our weapons, our money, and people, and yet right now we'll probably talk about why they just sort of thumb their nose at us, even though the United States is doing all this mischief and providing the weapons and all, but they won't take any orders. And I think that if you're going to do it, the orders should change. You know, like if you won't do what we tell you, you know, we might just cut off your aid. Well, why did we ever start it? You know, that's my beef.
Yeah. Well, here's just an example of the absolute hypocrisy of the U.S. government, of the Biden administration. I'm sure he's joined by most Republicans on this. This is from the same article. Despite the grim death toll, the U.S. still refuses to place any limits on Israel's use of American weapons. Yeah. When asked on Tuesday about civilian casualties, Pentagon spokeswoman said, "We don't put conditions on weapons we're sending or that Israel is using." So can you imagine? I mean, this makes you an accomplice to the crime. If killing innocent children is a crime, then we're accomplices. It would be like if you went on a killing spree and killed about 20 people and then said, "Here, have some more guns." You want some more guns?
It seems to be difficult to get the right information and have the good journals like Blumenthal and others. But the reporting, you know, and you mentioned that they reported about why was it reported differently for Russia than for Israel, or the Palestinians for that matter, whoever's committing the violence. So I think that you know, it's so, you know, we think we're defending one side or opposing the other side and saying, well, Russia didn't do anything here. But I see it as very easy to say that if you believe that we should not be involved, that's the basic problem. All of a sudden, you look at the whole world differently. You say, well, you know, neither side is pure. And neither side is trying to institute the Bill of Rights, you know, this sort of thing. So that I think is the big problem. And then we get into the factions, the money, and the corruption in governments, and the lying ineptness of government, and you end up with these crazy wars. And there's so many things that you know, come of, you know, whether it's domestic, social, religious, or any kind of rules the government makes. It usually, you know, sometimes deliberate, but sometimes just because it's unworkable. To me, I always go back to monetary policy. This pretense that a couple people can get together. Oh, well, we know today the interest rates ought to go up 0.12%. You know, it's all they brainwash themselves as well as they fit into the category of people who brainwash for a precise purpose.
A broken Netanyahu is miscalculating over Gaza, former Israeli PM says. And this is, you remember old Ehud Barak, who was I think he was a tanker he was a military guy. Go to the next one really quick. No, I'm sorry, Ehud Olmert. I'm sorry. What did I think? Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so he said that Benjamin Netanyahu has been destroyed emotionally by this massive failure on national security and is now miscalculating by preparing to take overall control of Gaza. So Ehud Olmert saying that Netanyahu is really basically flipped out and he's making all the wrong moves. And there is a consensus in Israel that that's what's happening.
Yeah. But there are so many parts that we try to understand and bring together because, you know, it's their policy and they invite some problem. But you were earlier on mentioned the fact, well, are we going to mention maybe the United States is involved in these discrepancy? And then what's the position been for years with Israel? And how do they get support? I mean, the money, I think money counts, you know, and when you get people dependent, that's why I think we have such problems on our borders. I think if you subsidize something, you get more of it. And we get more problems by subsidizing, you know, illegal immigration. The rewards you get if you can sneak into this country and we'll open up the gates. Sort of reminds me of opening up the gates. So you go on in, have fun in the Capitol, then we're going to arrest you.
Yeah, exactly. No kidding.
So, but there's a lot of things that are behind the scenes that happen. You know, the money, the military-industrial complex, religious beliefs. It's just very complex. That's why it should be kept more simple. It should be. It doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to initiate the. You know, if people would accept just one rule, one moral standard, and that is you have no right to interfere in other people's lives or in their property. But that just is beyond them. Everybody wants an angle, and then they are propagandized, and they have to be placed in fear. You have to scare them to death, and the end of the world's coming if you don't support the troops. And it's worked. It's worked for centuries, and I'd like to sort of say, try something new.
Yeah.